former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a grand jury in New York.
Today, the Department of Justice unsealed the historic indictment charging a former president for the first time in history with federal crimes.
New charges today concerning the classified documents he took from the White House.
Grand jury in Georgia has returned an indictment in connection with former President Donald Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
A grand jury in Washington, D.C. handed up the 45-page indictment accusing Trump of trying to overthrow the 2020 election results.
In a historic decision, Colorado's Supreme Court has ruled Donald Trump ineligible for the White House, saying the former president engaged in an insurrection on January 6th. The ruling marks the first time a presidential candidate has been barred from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
The disqualification clause, or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, bars any person from holding federal or state office who took an oath to support the U.S. Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion. And it's that provision that on Tuesday, the Colorado Supreme Court, in a 4-3 split decision, determined former President Trump engaged in an insurrection on January 6th of 2021, making him ineligible to run, therefore removing his name from the 2024 primary ballot.
The first state Supreme Court has decided that if you look at the 14th Amendment enacted after the Civil War, meant to protect from people who tried to destroy our country from seeking to represent it, that it once again applies here in 2023. That's extraordinary.
The twice impeached former president has denied leading an insurrection. The Trump campaign has vowed to appeal the ruling to the highest court in the land.
I think it's my guess, it's my speculation that the Supreme Court of the United States is likely to take this case. And that's because, for some of the reasons you've already pointed out, this is a big deal. And there are real consequences here. And the consequences here are different than if Trump had been allowed on the ballot. But saying categorically you can't even get on the ballot may be the kind of harm that will catch the Supreme Court's attention and identify a problem the Supreme Court will try to decide.
And this does smack of what you and I lived through in Bush v. Gore, where right. Anthony Kennedy wound up coming on the side of the majority and said, look, we got to stay out of this. Elections are messy, but they're not our business. The process and the people will decide. Does this smack of that for you?
Yes, I think this is very similar to Bush versus Gore in the way you just described. In Bush versus Gore, one of the big questions was whether or not the Supreme Court should, in a sense, overrule what the Florida Secretary of State had concluded.
Right.
Ultimately, what the Supreme Court decided was to let her decision stand. And in this circumstance, I think one of the critical questions the court would identify is whether or not the court itself should be the institution deciding this matter, or perhaps Congress should decide it, or we'll leave it to the states.
Right.
But the court's not going to want to take the responsibility for a final judgment here because it's going to get slammed either way.
They have just tried to bar President Trump from the Colorado ballot using an unconstitutional maneuver that is a bastardization of the 14th Amendment to our U.S. Constitution. That's why I'm making a pledge today that I will withdraw, I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot unless and until Trump's name is restored. And I demand that Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Nikki Haley do the same thing, or else these Republicans are simply complicit in this unconstitutional attack on the way we conduct our constitutional republic.
Listen, I think in the broad strokes, in terms of our democracy, there are very few magic wands. there are very few sort of magic spells that you cast that make a complex and difficult problem go away. It just doesn't happen very often in our political system, and I think that we shouldn't be under any illusions about the character and the partisan inclinations, among other things, of this current Supreme Court as it is constituted. That said,
Yeah.
this is not a crazy thing for a democracy to do.
China is a democracy too.